Hello and welcome everyone. This is Iván Cavielles from La Salle Gijón. In today's video lesson, we are going to revise the most basic tenses in the English language: present simple and present continuous. During this lesson, we are going to revise and practice the structure of these two tenses, as well as their uses in English, which are sometimes different than in Spanish. Also, we are going to review a special type of verbs called stative verbs. By the end of the video, you will be able to use properly and recognize the two verb tenses and the useful keywords which help us to identify them. These tenses are really useful, and you have surely studied them before. But you can always learn something new or a new perspective, can't you? Are you ready? Let's start. The first tense we are going to revise today is the present simple tense. How do we build a present simple sentence? Can you remember? I'm sure you can. Take some seconds to think of its structure before we deal with it. Stop the video and think of an example in the affirmative. Turn it into negative and then make a question with that example. Do it on your own, writing an easy sentence, so that way you can compare your results with my explanation. Okay, let's start with affirmative sentences in the present simple. To build these sentences, we need a subject, followed by a verb which will be on its base form, that is, in the infinitive without to, in all persons except for the third person singular, I mean he, she, or it. In these cases, when the subject refers to a third person singular, we must add a suffix s to the end of the verb. This addition of the third person s in the present simple is a very common mistake in English students, so be really careful not to make it. After this basic structure, we can add all sort of complements we want: direct, indirect, or place, time, mode, etc. Look at example. He plays baseball on the beach. The subject is a third person singular, right? It's easy as we have a pronoun as a subject, but it would be the same having instead, I don't know, the boy or a girl or Peter's dog as subjects, because all of them refer to third person singular forms, so all of them will add the s at the end of the verb. In the negative form, all tenses require the use of an auxiliary verb which takes the negative particle, not, and conjugate instead of the verbs, but most of them require the verb to take a specific form. We have three auxiliaries in English. To be, using continuous tenses, requires the verb to take ing form. To have, used in perfect tenses, requires the verb to take the past participle form. But what about to do, the one we use for simple tenses? Well, do has sometimes been called by grammarians dummy do, el do idiota, because it doesn't require the verb taking any different form but its base form, but I really prefer to call it in a more Lassallean way, kind do or voluntary do, because it helps the others, it helps the verb without asking anything back. So, let's go back to the structure then. As I said, do is going to be the auxiliary we will use in simple tenses. It will be conjugated and takes the negation, so the structure will be the subject, followed by the auxiliary in the negative, don't or doesn't. The main verb, which will be on the base form, the third person s, will be in the auxiliary, as it's the one we conjugate. That's why we are using doesn't, huh? And finally, the complements we need to add. Look at the example we used before, turn into the negative. He doesn't play baseball on the beach. As you can see, the s appears in the auxiliary, not in the main verb, which is in its base form. For questions, we will use a typical structure of the English questions, which imply that the subject and the auxiliary verb exchange positions in the sentence, what we call subject inversion. This happens in all tenses when we want to form any type of direct question. So, for a yes-no question, in the present simple, we will need to start with the auxiliary verb, do or does if the subject again is a third person singular, followed by the subject. Here we have the subject inversion. Then the main verb, which stays in the base form, as the auxiliary has been conjugated. And finally, the complements. Let's turn the same example into a yes-no question. Does he play baseball on the beach? The only possible answer to this will be, of course, yes or no, right? Well, big, fat no. In English, we never answer to a question with a single yes or no. We always add something. The right answers to these questions will be yes, he does, or no, he doesn't. We need to repeat the subject and auxiliary in our answers to speak properly. I know some of these ideas are really basic, and some of you will be feeling you are not learning much, but it's always important to revise these basic concepts to have a good base to build our language. So let's keep moving. For WH questions, the structure is going to be the same as the previous one, but the answer to these questions will require more as some information is not known by the speaker. In the previous example, on the beach is marked in a different color, you see? Okay, let's imagine we know that person plays baseball, but we don't know the place. That will be our missing information. To ask, we'll need a WH question. For these type of questions, we will start with the WH element or particle we need, followed by the auxiliary, because as a question we must do the subject inversion. Then we have the subject, followed by the verb in the base form, and finally the complement we want to add. Look at our example again. Where does he play baseball? We need to use the WH element where, as we wanted to know the place he plays baseball, right? Then the structure of all the questions. What would be the answer? Can you just answer yes or no? Of course not. The answer to a WH question must be an affirmative or a negative sentence. So the answer to this example will be our original example. He plays baseball on the beach. Where does he play baseball? He plays baseball on the beach. We have completed the whole cycle and revised the structure of a present simple sentence. But how and when do we use the present simple in English? In English, we use the present simple tense to talk about three different things. Firstly, to talk about states and general situations. This means situations that are permanent and they suffer no changes across time. For example, water boils at 100 degrees. This is a scientific reality, so it's always the same. Another example, the shop doesn't close until 8:30. Based on our experience, that shop has a fixed timetable, opening and closing hours, which does not change. It is permanent, so we use the present simple to express that permanency. A final example, my mother is optimistic. Does this mean she hasn't got a bad day? Of course not. It means that in general, her mood is optimistic. A second use of the present simple in English is to talk about habits and routines, the things that we do with a certain frequency over time. In these cases, we will always use some adverbs to make clear the frequency of the actions we express. If I say, for example, I usually go to the swimming pool twice a week, that means that the action has started in the past and will probably continue in the future. That is, last week I went to the swimming pool twice. This week I go twice. And next week I will go twice too. So, I usually go to the swimming pool twice a week. Other examples of the same kind could be My brother hardly ever watches TV. Or, Frank always uses his mobile phone while eating. As you may see in all of them, there's a frequency adverb. If you are not sure on how to use these adverbs or where they are placed, that's a good question to ask your class. Don't be shy and ask your questions. Finally, the third use of the present simple is to talk about schedules, horarios. They can be timetables, like your class timetable, for example, with all your classes. They can be calendars, programs like in the cinema or in TV, all kinds of schedules. Look at the examples. My train leaves at 10 in the morning. When we talk about means of transportation, we will always use the present simple because the hour they leave and arrive is supposed to be fixed and established, even though obviously there may be delays sometimes. Second example, the bookshop opens from 9 to 5 because that has been the opening hours they established when they opened the shop back in time. And again, it's fixed, it doesn't change. Finally, I have English class at 12:30. Because at the beginning of the course the school set up the timetables for classes and that has been the assigned hour for the English class. All these examples are examples of schedules. There are certain keywords which may help you identify in a sentence a present simple tense. Some of these keywords are adverbs of frequency, like always, sometimes, often, usually. Other adverbs as generally, normally, seldom. Or time expressions like every day, every month, every year, or days of the week, on Monday, Tuesday, etc. because there are a lot more of time expressions, In the typical fill in the blanks exercises, whenever you see one of these words, it would be a clear clue to show you they want a present simple form there, so you must be sure to write it. And remember to double check the subject and verb not to make mistakes with the third person singular s. Before making a little break for practice, it's important also to revise some basic orthographical rules when we add the suffix s in the third person singular sentence. The addition of third person singular suffix s requires some orthographic changes in several verb forms. Look at these charts that show you these changes. Most verbs would simply add the s to the base form, as in the examples, leave, leaves, take, takes. As you can see, the pronunciation of these s is simple. You just need to mark the s. Those verbs ending in o, s, double s, sh, ch, x, add es to the verb, to the base form, instead of a single s, as for example, do, does, fax, faxes, push, pushes, catch, catches. In most of these cases, as you can see, the pronunciation will be is, as it's impossible for us to make two s sounds together marking the conjugation. Try to pronounce faxes without making the is sound. It's impossible, At least difficult. Those verbs ending in vowel plus y, as enjoy or pay, keep the y and add an s. Enjoy, enjoys, pay, pays. But those ending in consonant plus y, add ies. Study, studies. Fly, flies. The pronunciation rules mentioned before for the s sound is the same for the plural of words in English, and apply the same orthographical rules too, okay? So that is very important to remember. Okay, let's stop for a second. We've been reviewing the form and uses of the present simple in English, and before moving on with the present continuous, we must check that you are still with me. I'm going to show you some sentences, but there's something wrong with them. I will give you 10 seconds to identify the mistake. Think of the correct sentence and know which use of the present simple is applying before telling you the answer. If you need more time, please feel free to stop the video and play it again when you are ready to see the answer. You may write the sentence before you see the solutions, and that may help you also. Ready? There we go. Okay, so remember you have to correct the sentences and find out the use of the tense applies in them. Sentence 1. My plane take off at 9 p.m. on Monday. What would the correct sentence be? What's the mistake? What type of use of the present simple is applying? Think for a second. It's easy. The correct sentence would be my plane takes off at 9 p.m. on Monday. Because in the original sentence, what is wrong is the lack of the third person s in the verb take. The use applied in here is that of schedules because we are talking about a means of transportation. And as you must know, means of transportations are always in present simple. Sentence 2. The ice cream melts not down in the freezer. 10 seconds to think. The correct answer would be the ice cream doesn't melt down in the freezer. In this case, the mistake is in the structure of the negative sentence, and it lacks the required auxiliary verb. In this case, doesn't, because the subject, the ice cream, is third person singular. The use of present simple applied is that of general situations, situations that are permanent on time. If you keep the ice cream in the freezer, it will keep cold and won't melt down. It's always like that. Let's go with the third sentence. My parents always don't let me go out. Does it sound good to you? What's the mistake? 10 seconds to find out. The correct answer would be my parents don't always let me go out. The mistake lies in the position of the frequency adverb, which must be between the auxiliary and the main verb in the sentence. In this case, the use would be that of habits and routines. Finally, sentence 4. They stays at home because the play don't starts until 9. What would be the correct sentence? 10 seconds. Right. The correct sentence would be they stay at home because the play doesn't start until 9. There are two mistakes because they, even though it's a third person, it's plural, so the verb will stay in the base form. And in the second sentence, it must be the auxiliary and not the main verb, the one carrying the suffix s. The use applied is again that of schedules, as theater plays are part of a theater program, which is a type of calendar. It is a fixed date and time. Well, our practice is done. How was it? Did you do it right? It was some basic practice to activate your minds and revise a little bit what we have just reviewed before moving into our next topic. If you have problems with the practice, or you have some questions or things you don't understand, please remember to ask your teachers in class time. They will help you with your difficulties all the time. Let's move on to the next point. Present continuous. Ready?